Let's get to the bottom of how Alpha Beta saves you money.
The savings don't stop.
Fact is, if it isn't one thing you're saving on at Alpha Beta, it's another. Day in and day out, the savings just don't stop. You name the department, we'll give you a way to save.
When shopping at modern supermarkets like Walmart or Kroger, do you ever suddenly wonder, where did all the familiar stores from the old days go? There was once an America where little grocery stores and modest supermarkets didn't just feed families. They carried the memories of an entire generation. But as the years passed, they quietly disappeared, leaving only a void that now lives in nostalgia. So what happened to them? In today's video, let's rediscover 25 grocery stores that vanished without a trace in America. Trust me, you'll find your own childhood in them. 25. A&P. The smell of freshly ground coffee that never came back. Do you remember the last time you smelled freshly ground coffee right in the middle of a supermarket? For many Americans who grew up in the 1960s, the answer is always tied to the name A&P. It was more than just a grocery store. It was a little world of its own, where bright fluorescent lights stretched across endless aisles, and the rich aroma of 8 o'clock coffee filled the air. Back then, a can of Campbell's soup cost just 10 cents. Butter sold for 59 cents a pound, and cold cuts were sliced thin, wrapped in wax paper, and placed carefully into brown paper bags. Mothers stood at the checkout counter, holding tight to their green stamps, already picturing the stainless steel pot or encyclopedia set they would trade them in for. Meanwhile, kids eagerly watched the mechanical cash register, each pull of the lever ringing out with a cheerful ding, the simple sound of a family's small joys. In those days, shopping at A&P never meant waiting long, because every register had a cashier ready. There was none of the 20 lanes, but only 3 open frustration that we see in supermarkets today. At its peak, A&P owned as many as 16,000 stores, the true giant of American retail. But it fell behind as suburban supermarkets rose and Walmart and Kroger dominated. In 2016, the last store closed, ending 156 years of history with regret. Today, you can still find 8 o'clock coffee on supermarket shelves, but you will no longer see clerks grinding beans at the counter, and no scent will cling to your clothes as you leave. Anyone who lived through that moment knows this. A&P left behind a piece of America's childhood soul, something no modern supermarket can ever bring back. In 24, Colonial Stores, Big Star, the Red Rooster in morning shopping memories. If A&P brings back the smell of ground coffee, then for many Southern families, supermarket memories are tied to the Red CS Rooster. Colonial Stores was founded in 1901 in Norfolk, Virginia, and by its peak in the 1950s, had more than 500 stores stretching from Florida to Maryland. That was the era when the Red Rooster logo, launched in 1947, became one of the most iconic brand symbols in American retail history. Just seeing that rooster on a brown paper bag meant groceries for the week were ready. What made Colonial special was the self-service experience, something new at the time. Customers no longer had to hand a list to a clerk, but pushed shiny metal carts themselves, walking through aisles glowing with fluorescent lights. Mom picked Florida oranges for just a few cents a pound. Dad weighed fresh beef at the counter, while the kids trailed behind, staring at the bright cereal shelves and secretly wishing for a brand new box of Oreos. That atmosphere was completely different from the dark, cramped corner shops of the era. Colonial brought a sense of modern convenience, but also community, where neighbors still met and chatted, right in the busy aisles. By the 1960s, Colonial began renaming many stores to Big Star to keep up with discount supermarket trends. Though it survived for a few more decades, it was eventually swallowed up by giants like Kroger and Walmart. By the 1990s, the Red Rooster had vanished from the streets. For the older Southern generation, it was more than the loss of a supermarket chain. It was the disappearance of a childhood symbol. That Red Rooster wasn't just a logo. It brought back the morning light shopping with Mom, the rattle of carts on tile floors, and a time when America was still amazed by the very idea of self-service groceries. 23. Alpha Beta, a supermarket like an open dictionary. Have you ever shopped in a store where every item was arranged alphabetically? In California in 1917, that strange idea became real when Alpha Beta opened. Unlike cluttered shops, Alpha Beta neatly placed items from A to Z, apples next to aspirin, soap beside sugar. For busy homemakers, it was a revolution. They knew exactly where to go for what they needed. And who could forget the cowboy Alfie, the cheerful mascot smiling from the sign as if to greet customers from afar. In the 1960s, families in Pomona or Covina treated Alpha Beta as a weekend outing. Parents pushed the cart while kids argued over cereals and candy. People still clearly remember the store on Vincent Avenue in Covina, where one day the price of candy suddenly jumped from 10 cents to 12 cents. A small shock that kids recalled for years. Alpha Beta wasn't just about selling groceries. It created a sense of order and reliability. In the memory of many Californians, the wide aisles, bright lights, and squeaky shopping carts were the sounds of childhood. But in 1994, after merging into Ralph's, the name Alpha Beta disappeared completely. Today's supermarkets may be bigger and more convenient, but they will never bring back that familiar sight. A cowboy smiling from the sign, and a world arranged like a dictionary that every family knew by heart. 22. Dominick's, the all-in-one experience in Chicago. When it comes to supermarkets of the 20th century, no one forgets the name Dominick's. Founded in 1918 by Dominick DiMatteo, Dominick's grew for nearly a century, reaching more than 100 stores by the 1990s. But what made it special was not just size, but its pioneering services. Dominick's was among the few chains daring to try things ahead of their time. In-store pharmacies, cafes, even photo developing right next to the produce section. For Chicago customers, shopping at Dominick's felt like a multi-purpose experience. Buying groceries, sipping coffee, and dropping off family film rolls, all in one trip. Many still remember the Dominick's on the North Side, where moms took their kids shopping for fresh food and then treated them to a sweet from the bakery counter. Affordable prices, a friendly atmosphere, and above all, the feeling of belonging to a community. That's what Dominick's gave its shoppers. When Safeway bought the chain, Dominick's slowly lost its local identity. By 2013, the last store had closed, ending nearly a century of presence. Chicagoans said at the time that they didn't just lose a supermarket, they lost a piece of the city's soul. Today, the old Dominick's buildings may house other supermarkets, but in people's memories, the name still echoes. A Chicago symbol where everyday habits have now turned into history. 21. Delchamps, lights that never went out. If you were in New Orleans or Mobile during the 1970s to 1980s, you probably saw the name Delchamps glowing on its bright green sign. It began in 1921 in Alabama, and just a few years later, in 1928, they opened the largest supermarket in the state. From there, Delchamps quickly spread into Florida and across the Southeast, becoming a source of pride for many Southern families. What made Delchamps different was its bold idea of a 24-hour superstore, something almost unheard of at the time. While most stores shut down after dark, Delchamps kept its lights on all night. Families coming home late from work could stop and shop. Young people gathered in aisles packed with products, and kids loved sampling the newest foods. Sometimes people went to Delchamps not because they needed something urgently, but simply for the feeling of being in a place that stayed alive all night, an early version of 24/7 life. But the fierce competition at the end of the 20th century slowly drained Delchamps. By 2000, the brand had disappeared completely. For Southerners, its loss was more than the end of a supermarket. It was the loss of late-night shopping trips with family, laughter echoing in empty aisles, and the pride of saying, "We had a supermarket that never slept." 20. Bruno's, a tragedy that shattered a family empire. It all started with a tiny 800-square-foot store in Birmingham, Alabama in 1932. Bruno's grew rapidly, and by the early 1990s, it ranked among the top 40 supermarket chains in the United States, with more than 200 locations across the South. People remembered Bruno's not just for its competitive prices, but for the family spirit in every detail. The stores were still run by members of the Bruno family. Employees stayed for decades and treated each other like relatives. And customers were greeted by name, sometimes even asked about their health or their work. Kids shopping with their parents often received a small bakery treat, a simple gesture that felt warm and genuine. Many Alabama residents said that shopping at Bruno's felt like stepping into the neighborhood kitchen, where everyone knew one another and treated each other with care. The most popular was its Food World chain, where fresh food was sold at shockingly low prices. Whole chickens, ground beef, and Florida oranges were often on sale for 99 cents, with buy one get one free weekends that packed the aisles with working families. The simple red and white signage gave a strong sense of trust. Then tragedy struck in 1991. A plane crash claimed the lives of top executives and many Bruno family members. That devastating loss stripped the company of its guiding soul, and decline set in. By 2009, Bruno's was gone for good. For Alabama residents, Bruno's disappearance was not just a commercial loss. It left an emptiness, as the family store, once a source of stable jobs, community ties, and daily life, became only a memory. An empire built on trust and closeness had vanished within a few decades. 19. Mars Supermarkets. A true neighborhood market, mention Baltimore, in the 1950s to 1970s. And many people immediately think of Mars Supermarkets, the family-owned chain founded by Joseph Deanna. The name Mars didn't come from a faraway planet, but from the famous Mars flying boat of the era, a symbol of modernity and ambition. For more than 50 years, Mars never had more than 13 stores, but its small scale was exactly its charm. It was a true neighborhood supermarket. Clerks knew customers by name, remembered their kids, and even saved the best cuts of meat for familiar moms. Fresh bread came out every morning, vegetables were stacked in wooden crates, and the atmosphere was always warm and simple. Shopping there was not just about groceries, but about meeting neighbors and exchanging stories right in the aisle. Mars never chased flashy ads or huge expansions. Instead, it kept prices fair, produce fresh, and service heartfelt. Baltimore residents often said, shopping at Mars felt like visiting family. But by the early 2000s, Mars could no longer keep up with big players like Wegmans, Giant, and Harris Teeter, with their upscale departments and large-scale discounting. In 2016, the last Mars closed. When the sign came down, many Baltimoreans felt that an entire neighborhood era had ended, a time when grocery shopping meant familiarity, not rushing crowds in megastores. 18. Jitney Jungle. From a nickel to a historic legal battle. The story of Jitney Jungle began in 1919 in Jackson, Mississippi. Jitney was slang for a nickel, reflecting its bargain spirit from the very beginning. Throughout the 20th century, Jitney Jungle was a familiar yet distinctive brand in the South. Its most important feature was being a pioneer of the cash and carry model, where customers picked out their own items, paid, and carried them home, instead of waiting for clerks to serve them. In the 1920s, Jitney Jungle famously battled its rival Piggly Wiggly in a landmark Supreme Court case, and won, establishing that self-service was not a monopoly. It was a historic moment in American retail, and Jitney Jungle became a trailblazer. At its peak, the chain had over 100 stores, making it the largest privately owned grocery network in the nation. Southerners remembered Jitney Jungle for its convenience, its bold signage, and most of all, the sense of freedom to choose, a brand new idea at the time. But by the 1990s, after the founding family sold out, the company lost its way. Acquisitions piled on debt, and it couldn't keep up with Walmart or Winn-Dixie. Eventually, Winn-Dixie took over, and the Jitney Jungle name vanished. Today, for many Mississippians, memories of Jitney Jungle are tied to morning shopping with Mom, nickels jingling in their pockets, and the glowing Jitney Jungle sign at the corner. Now it survives only as a nostalgic piece of Southern childhood. 17. Kohl's Food Stores. The familiar curved roof. In Milwaukee in the late 1940s, the name Kohl's didn't mean clothing, it meant food. Maxwell Kohl, a German immigrant, opened the first store in 1946, and less than 2 decades later, Kohl's Food had become the largest supermarket chain in Wisconsin. Its unmistakable trademark was the curved arch roof at the front of each store, a signal that you had come to the right place. Families in Milwaukee were used to weekly trips to Kohl's. Mom picked out cuts of meat, Dad grabbed local beer, and kids eagerly waited for the candy aisle. Wide aisles, bright light, and friendly service made grocery shopping part of the rhythm of family life. Kohl's Food was not just about cheap prices, but also about unusual convenience. They carried imported goods, their bakery smelled of fresh bread, and most of all, they focused on serving the local community. People recall store clerks helping customers wheel carts to their cars, a gesture that made Kohl's feel like more than just a supermarket. In 1982, A&P bought the food chain, and by 2003, Kohl's Food was gone completely. What still feels strange to Milwaukee residents is that the Kohl's name now means clothing and shoes instead of milk, bread, and Campbell's soup. For those who grew up in the 1960s, the memory of the curved roof, the fresh produce aisles, and the weekly grocery trip now lives only in their minds. 16. Food Fair caused Pantry Pride, the East Coast discount craze. For those who lived in Philadelphia, New Jersey, or Miami during the 1950s to 60s, Food Fair and later Pantry Pride were a familiar part of childhood. Food Fair was founded in the early 20th century, and by the 1960s, it was operating hundreds of stores along the East Coast. What made it stand out were the massive sales promotions. Pantry Pride built its image on cheap prices and heavy discounts. Flyers were printed in bulk, and hung right at store entrances, drawing housewives who lined up early to grab bargains. That routine created its own culture. On weekends, parents drove the kids to food fair, scanning the huge red sale signs and filling the cart with enough goods for the week at unbeatable prices. Boxes of cereal, cans of soup, and packages of meat so cheap they seemed unreal made Pantry Pride a direct rival to A&P and Safeway. For customers, Pantry Pride was more than just a discount supermarket. It was a family experience, squeezing through crowded aisles, shopping and chatting together. The joy of grocery shopping back then was tied to the feeling of saving every penny. But rapid expansion and fierce competition pushed the chain into bankruptcy. By the 1980s, Food Fair and Pantry Pride had disappeared completely. For Philadelphia residents, the name now lingers only as a faint echo. Memories of crowded mornings chasing bargains, the excitement of carrying home bags overflowing with groceries while still having change left over. Something no giant supermarket today can truly bring back. 15. Finast. Clerks remembered the customer's taste. In New England during the mid-20th century, Finast, short for First National Stores, didn't need flashiness to be remembered. Finast shops often sat on neighborhood corners, close enough for housewives to walk to with wicker baskets in hand. When you stepped inside, you weren't just a shopper, you were a familiar face. The butcher knew exactly which steak cut your family preferred. The cashier remembered what grade your child was in. Kids were given crisp sugar donuts for just a few cents, while the grown-ups chatted about Boston winners or the latest Hartford news. Finast offered a sense of safety and closeness that mega supermarkets never had. With hundreds of stores across the Northeast, Finast felt like the heartbeat of the neighborhood. But by the 1990s, after multiple buyouts and mergers, the name disappeared. For New Englanders, its loss meant losing a piece of community warmth, something that cold barcode scanners in modern stores could never replace. 14. Grand Union, the warm glow of the post-war years. If Finast brought friendliness, Grand Union symbolized modern life. The brand had existed since the 19th century, but it was after World War II that it truly shined. Stores in New York, Vermont, and Pennsylvania glowed with fluorescent lights, with produce aisles arranged like colorful stages. American families treated weekend trips to Grand Union as ritual. Fathers picked out roasts for Sunday dinner. Mothers weighed bags of apples or pears, and kids eagerly grabbed cereal boxes with surprise toys inside. That setting turned grocery shopping into a collective experience, reflecting the prosperity of the post-war boom. But by the late 20th century, after multiple bankruptcies, Grand Union had withered. The once bright red signs were gone, surviving only in memory. For those who grew up in the Northeast, its disappearance felt like losing the warm light of a more prosperous time. 13. Furs. The whole family dined inside the supermarket. In the Southwest, there was Furs Supermarkets, a chain that stood out because it didn't just sell food. It offered cafeteria dining inside the store. In the 1950s to 60s, this was rare. For families in Texas and New Mexico, grocery shopping became a full family day. After buying groceries, everyone sat down together to enjoy barbecue, salad, and bright-colored Jell-O for dessert. The clatter of trays, the smell of smoking meat, and laughter filling the dining area made Furs a place of connection. Kids remembered the sweetness of pudding. Adults remembered the convenience of 2-in-1. But by the early 2000s, Furs could no longer compete. When the last store closed, many in the Southwest felt they lost more than a supermarket. They lost a rare community experience, where a shopping trip ended with a warm family meal. 12. Lucky Stores, California's promise of low prices. In California in the 1960s, Lucky Stores was an icon. The slogan, "Lucky means low prices," was not just advertising, it was a promise. Bright red signs and bold price tags of 99 cents and $1.29 everywhere convinced shoppers they had truly scored a bargain. Going to Lucky became a weekly routine. Mothers stocked up on discounted goods, fathers picked out a few bottles of local beer, and kids tagged along hoping for candy or cereal with a toy inside. Lucky created a lively consumer culture, where low prices were a point of pride for working-class families. But when Albertsons took over in the late 1990s, Lucky nearly disappeared. A few stores later revived the name, but for older Californians, the original Lucky, with its red signs, genuine sales, and bustling atmosphere, is gone forever. 11. National Tea Company, the Midwest on every corner. In Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Louis in the early 20th century, National Tea Company was a common stop. It was one of the Midwest's first supermarket chains, representing the modernization of urban life. Stores glowed with lights, shelves were neatly stocked, and prices matched the budgets of working families. Residents remembered the heavy brown paper bags filled with pounds of beef, fresh greens, milk cartons, and cans of coffee. For many families, going to National Tea meant meals were secure. After the war, it became a symbol of growing prosperity among the working class. But by the 1990s, National Tea was gone. The familiar red and yellow signs vanished, surviving only in old photographs. For older Midwesterners, its disappearance felt like watching a familiar street corner erased from the map of memory. 10. Schwegman Brothers, the giant supermarket of New Orleans. Some Louisiana residents still say, if you grew up in New Orleans and never went to Schwegman's, you never really lived here. Indeed, Schwegman Brothers' giant supermarkets became a city legend. From a small store in 1869, by the mid-20th century, it had grown into massive markets where you could find everything: groceries, liquor, household goods, even banking services. What made it most unique were the paper bags printed with political cartoons, a trademark of the Schwegman family. People carried them home, reading the jokes aloud and laughing along the way. Schwegman's was more than a supermarket. It was a reflection of New Orleans' humor and free spirit. When the chain collapsed in the late 1990s, locals said they lost more than a grocery store. They lost a piece of the community's soul. 9. Waldbaum's, Brooklyn's warmth in every loaf of bread. On a winter morning in Brooklyn, walking into Waldbaum's meant hearing the clatter of metal carts and smelling the aroma of fresh bread. Founded in 1904, Waldbaum's was not just a supermarket chain, it was part of the daily rhythm of immigrant New Yorkers, especially the Jewish community. People remembered the always crowded kosher meat counter, the cashier greeting customers with a familiar voice, kids excited for candy while parents stocked up for the week. At its peak, Waldbaum's had more than 140 stores, but still managed to keep the neighborhood feel that larger chains often lost. By 2015, Waldbaum's was gone. For many New Yorkers, it was a bitter loss. Waldbaum's had been a childhood memory that always smelled like fresh bread. 8. Jewel Osco, everything under one roof. In Chicago in the 1960s, almost everyone knew Jewel Osco, one of the boldest ideas of the time. Jewel was a supermarket chain, and Osco was a pharmacy. When combined, they created the food plus drug combo store, where you could buy milk, bread, aspirin, and cosmetics in a single stop. Today, this sounds ordinary, but back then, it was a retail revolution. Chicagoans remembered the large, brightly lit stores where mom picked produce, dad stopped for aspirin, and kids got a free lollipop from the pharmacy counter. Jewel or Osco became the modern marketplace, offering a convenience no one had experienced before. Today, Jewel still exists in Chicago, but the combo concept has faded outside the Midwest. For many, the memory of Jewel Osco is the memory of a time when everything really was under one roof, before giant supermarkets lost their sense of familiarity. 7. Kash and Karry. Pay cash and carry it out. The name Kash and Karry said it all. In mid-20th century Florida, the brand delivered a fast, simple way to shop. Pay cash and carry your groceries home. The playful logo and bold red price signs gave it a friendly, budget-friendly image. Everyone remembered Kash and Karry as their first store. Kids went with mom, tugging on brown paper bags, while housewives picked up meat, milk, and canned goods at bargain prices. The stores were plain, not flashy, but practical and affordable for working and middle-class families. By the early 2000s, the brand was rebranded as Sweet Bay, then disappeared completely. For Floridians, Kash and Karry was more than a store. It was a familiar symbol tied to their growing-up years, and when it disappeared, it felt like losing a piece of childhood. 6. Hills Supermarket, New York's working-class market. If you grew up in Queens or the Bronx in the 1960s, you probably remember Hills Supermarket. It wasn't as polished as A&P, nor as big as Grand Union, but it was famous for being practical. Stores were plain, shelves were packed, and prices were always lower than the competition. Hills was the go-to stop for working-class families. Immigrant households crowded in for produce, meat, and fish, leaving with heavy brown paper bags without overspending. For them, Hills wasn't about an experience. It was about putting food on the table. By the late 1970s, Hills disappeared under mounting competition. New Yorkers mourned not just the loss of a cheap, nearby store, but also the loss of no-frills, authentic shopping trips that were as real as daily life itself. 5. Farmer Jack, the farmer in the Motor City. In Detroit during the 1960s, as the roar of Ford and GM engines filled the streets, the green Farmer Jack sign carried a different rhythm, warm, tied to family meals. Founded in 1924, Farmer Jack quickly became Michigan and Ohio's leading chain, with more than 100 stores at its peak. What made it special was the emphasis on fresh food, true to its name. Residents remembered piles of Michigan apples, the scent of Florida oranges, cold glass bottles of milk, and lively meat counters with the sound of cleavers. Produce was displayed in rustic wooden bins, giving the feel of a farm in the city. Prices were affordable too. A pound of apples cost only a few cents, and whole chickens or ground beef were always on weekend specials. For many working families in Detroit, Saturday meant a trip to Farmer Jack. Parents stocked up for the week, while kids hovered around the bakery counter, waiting for a sugar-coated donut. The noisy, friendly atmosphere became a lasting memory for millions of Midwesterners. In 2007, when the last store closed, Detroit residents sighed. The city has lost a piece of childhood. Farmer Jack was more than a place to buy food. It was a cultural slice of Detroit that now survives only in memory. 4. Wrigley Supermarkets, Detroit's fallen giant. Before Kroger and Meijer dominated the Midwest, Wrigley Supermarkets was one of Detroit's 6 grocery giants. From the 1930s through the 1960s, the Wrigley sign appeared everywhere, and for many families, it was a symbol of trust. Wrigley's was famous for its quality meat counters. People still remember clerks in white coats and paper hats slicing bright red cuts of beef and wrapping them carefully in brown paper. Regular customers were greeted by name, and sometimes the best cut was set aside just for them. Inside, the store was bright, with big hand-written price boards. Butter, 59 cents a pound. Tomatoes, 19 cents a pound. Each week, Wrigley's flyers were delivered across the neighborhood, turning Grocery Day into a much-anticipated event. At Wrigley's, you didn't just shop. You were remembered. You had conversations. And it felt like being in a family store. That was personalized service, something modern supermarkets rarely offer anymore. By the end of the 20th century, Wrigley's disappeared under the pressure of Walmart and Kroger. For Detroiters, its loss felt like losing a piece of the city's soul. Today, when people mention Wrigley's, they recall an era when supermarkets sold not only food, but also friendliness and trust. 3. Chatham supermarkets. The workers' stop. In Detroit's post-war golden years, when Ford and GM assembly lines were running at full speed, Chatham supermarkets became the place where workers poured in after their shifts. Founded in Detroit, Chatham quickly spread across Michigan's industrial towns, becoming part of working-class urban life. Chatham's greatest strength was its low prices and constant promotions. Each week, flyers were delivered directly to workers' homes, advertising discounts on beef, whole chickens, and produce for just a few cents. On Friday nights, streams of workers in blue uniforms, still stained with grease, crowded into Chatham, filling carts with food for their families. Chatham was more than a supermarket. It was a familiar stop for the working community. People met friends there, talked about their shifts, and discussed the upcoming Sunday football game. Every checkout line and handwritten sign carried that sense of closeness. By the 1980s, Chatham closed store after store, taking with it a part of Detroit's working-class soul, the simple rhythm of life during the city's industrial glory days. 2. Cub Foods, a candy paradise. Kids never forgot. In 1968, a strange new name appeared in Minnesota and quickly left its mark: Cub Foods. As one of the pioneers of the discount warehouse style model, Cub immediately became a go-to for families looking to buy more for less. What kids remembered most was Cub's giant candy section. Long rows of clear plastic bins overflowed with M&Ms, gummy bears, and caramels. The rainbow colors felt like a sweet paradise, and children begged their parents to stop there. And then there were the free Sunday samples: a slice of cheese, a bit of sausage, or a crunchy cracker that made the whole store feel like a fairground. Adults came for the wholesale bargains, kids came for the candy and samples, and together Cub turned shopping into a family destination. Although a few Cub stores still exist today, many have closed. For those who grew up in the 1970s to 80s in Minnesota, Cub Foods remains alive in memory as a sweet, colorful part of childhood. 1. Red Owl. The Red Owl sticker. Few supermarket logos stir as much nostalgia as the bright red owl. Founded in Minnesota in the 1920s, Red Owl spread across Wisconsin, North Dakota, and even Montana. For more than half a century, those glowing red owl eyes were a beacon, signaling fresh food, fair prices, and a week's worth of meals for the family. Red Owl began in 1922, and within decades, it grew to hundreds of stores across the Midwest. Walking into Red Owl meant stepping into a simple but familiar world. Neatly lined wooden shelves, crates of apples and potatoes set on concrete floors, and handwritten price tags hung on wire. Many stores had a fresh meat counter, where the butcher, in a white coat, wrapped steaks in wax paper and marked the price in red pencil. The smell of fresh bread from the small bakery in back mixed with the ding of the cash register. Children waited eagerly for checkout, hoping to get a small comic book or a Red Owl logo sticker. Little giveaways no supermarket offers today. Red Owl wasn't fancy, but it etched itself into memory with ordinary details. Smaller metal carts than today's, thick brown wrapping paper tied with twine, and black and white flyers delivered to homes advertising beef at 39 cents a pound and milk at 49 cents a gallon. For Midwest workers and farmers, Red Owl was security, affordable food, familiarity, and a community of known faces. Like many other regional chains, Red Owl lost ground when Cub Foods and Walmart swept in with giant stores and aggressive pricing. In 1988, the last store closed, and the Red Owl eyes vanished from the streets. Yet the memory never faded. Just seeing the logo in a movie like A Serious Man by the Coen Brothers can bring back the sounds and smells of childhood. Simple, humble, and irreplaceable. So together, we've walked through aisles that are now gone, heard the old cash register ding, and smelled coffee that once filled the air. These stores may have disappeared from America's retail map, but they will never disappear from our memories. What about you? Which store left you with the strongest memories? Do you still remember the last time you shopped there with your family? Share those precious moments in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you can join us on more journeys back to old America.